Maybe my first question for you would be, what has been the added value of your work in the past 7 years, and why do you think data analysis for live music spaces is essential, especially in times of crisis like this?
Live DMA consists of 20 different associations within Europe. So what I do with Live DMA is helping structuring data collection into their associations, make sure they start collecting data, they analyze it in the right way, and then most importantly, use it in the right way, because it's key for representation of your music venues, but also to start up dialogues with governments and politicians. Yeah, we learned in the last years that, for example, politicians won't really listen to you if you don't back things up with statistics.
So Simon, actually, for how long have you been analyzing data for the Music Venues Trust, and how does it contribute to serve the purpose of your organization?
We started with basically that data, what used to be there 10 years ago and what's left now, and where did they all go and why, can be answered by collecting more data and looking at how hard it is to keep going as a small venue. So we are looking at the smallest venues you've got, and then their particular struggles are quite different. Using the survey that that Live DMA do, and some of our own extra questions on top of that, we are able to see what works and what doesn't, and to share that information with the members. They all need help and they all want help, and the best way of helping them is to get them talking to each other, because they've all got different ideas and they've all got something that really worked. And I'm not saying that thing would work everywhere.
How did you create Creative Footprint, and how does it inform your work to protect the cultural rights in Berlin?
When we lobbied for Berlin's music venues in the Chamber of Commerce, sitting right next to the real estate developers, for us it was essential to have more data and to be better prepared than we were in that time, because we made a lot of effort into creating emotions in protests and into pointing out that venues are closing, but we couldn't really make a case. And so we came onto the idea of creating something like the carbon footprint for creative space, because if you chop down 3 trees, everybody knows today that you have to plant them somewhere else to keep it in a balance in a city. And so our way of presenting the data to real estate developers, to city officials, was to present this idea of a creative footprint. We developed quite some projects out of that data. In every city, something developed with that information. In Berlin, for instance, we created a tool which is called Club Radar, where we now see the information coming in from all the developments which are happening in the city, from city data. And we basically have a traffic light system that when there is like a new development too close to a music venue, that we get kind of a red light warning sign and email alerts.
Actually, Renata, I read that you did take inspiration from Creative Footprint, but also the Music Venues Trust when you elaborated your survey. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of that SM, and why did you decide to launch it?
In our case, specifically in Brazil, we needed to go a little bit further because we never had a data-driven project. We had many problems and struggles to point out the importance of the cultural sector. It came the necessity to organize this value, this amount of data, in order to empower our community. We are an event that brings some kind of information, some kind of knowledge, and data is part of that. Data is a powerful tool to improve all the dialogues, good and bad dialogues with different sectors. We have been developing different research, one focused in the venues, as you point out, other one in partnership with Berkeley, to study the women participation or the lack of women participation in music industry. And now we just finished the study about the impacts of COVID in our market in Brazil.
So one of the core philosophies of the creative footprint is to show the spillover effects of live music spaces. From what I understand, it's really to show that music is one core activity, but it also generates other related economic and social activities. So yeah, how does that really translate into your findings? And is there specific findings that you want to highlight here?
This is basically the set of data parameters that we are aggregating, and then we gather about 25,000 data items and then crunch it down. All the cities we have a index created, so it's always a number out of 10, and you can see that Berlin is 8.02 out of 10. New York has an index of 7.29 out of 10. And then finally, Tokyo, which is just being published in the next days, has an index of 6.51 out of 10.
And it actually just echoes to me in one of the major trends that has been happening, especially in the UK, is that a lot of venues have been closing over the past year, even more than it used to be before. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and other findings you've been making with Music Venues Trust?
Last year was the first year that we managed to have, I think, the same number at the end of the year that we had at the beginning. It wasn't the same venues, but it was the same number of venues. In terms of the government's involvement in small music venues, there virtually isn't any. Other than issuing a liquor license or not, that's about it. There are no grants, there's no support mechanism at all. It's every man for himself. We did lobby the government, and there is the agent of change principle has been accepted, and that was enormous. It made such a difference. I don't know if anyone knows what the agent of change principle is, but it's basically, if you're making the change, you're responsible for the problems that change causes. The data that we collect is very useful in that you can apply solutions that you've used in one place in another place. And so we need to keep track of where we've been successful, and in cases where we haven't, why we weren't. The data is key to everything.
You know, working with data collection at the level of the continent, it's obviously quite a big work to do and to achieve, and it's also another challenge because of the diversity and the fragmentation of the way the European live music ecosystem works. And this is part of the findings you also made with the survey from LiveDMA. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Especially when you start and people, it's really hard for the venues when they never gave their data to organizations to get the trust to give them your data, and because you have to convince them it's in their own benefit. And now you can also see the damage from the lockdown. You can see it already in these numbers, because the audience income is turned to zero, which means like that the private non-profits and the public venues can still cover a lot of their fixed costs now when they close down with the subsidy. So they of course they have damage, but it's relatively less damage than the larger and the private commercial venues, who basically have no income at all anymore. And although the 40-60 division seems like close to 50-50, you can really see in the sort of functions they do that, like all the the highest remunerations are occupied by men. But this kind of data can also help in empower gender minorities and projects, and we can measure trends and developments.
Some would say it's a bit too soon to fully grasp the magnitude of the crisis, but in a way, those few figures and findings that you've been already working on can really inform also the first measures, support measures, and relief funds that can lead the way to recovery. But Renata, actually, in Brazil, the crisis is still very much peaking, and you said that you were developing also studies to survey COVID-19. How's it happening?
One thing that we found out that in this music sector, most of the people are micro entrepreneurs. And also, we found out a very low rate of associativism. There's a lack of association, and we are trying to get data so we could empower these communities to get information together and to reunite and fight for their rights and to organize the way that they will deal with government.
Lutz, actually, the methodology you developed with Creative Footprint can still very much apply to measure the impact of this crisis. Have you been working on projects to continue using the methodology?
Yeah, well, we have the data before COVID, so it will be easy for us to measure it after COVID again. I tried to develop methodologies which are transferable to other cities, so we can also compare cities to each other and also spark a bit the competition between cities, and to be a creative city, to be a city of music, to have a vibrant nightlife is a very important factor to attract this young generation, which can work from all over the world.
One of the stresses and one of the reivindications of the crisis is to allocate really proper supports for the cultural sectors, be it at local or even European level, or even national level in the case of Brazil as well.
The main worry is the long term, because in a lot of regions there's enough compensation and support for short term, for like March, April, May, and now is there a sort of summer stop, like a lot of venues already closed down in the summer. But the real worry is, of course, in the fourth quarter of the year, because our data also learn us that 35% of the turnover of the money from the venues is made in the last 3 months of the year, in October, November, December. That's when all the bands are touring. That's when you have most sold out shows. So even if they are slowly starting to organize concerts again in the coming months, it will be, for most venues, you lose money if you don't sell 70 or 80% of your tickets. So you can't do any normal activities and a normal economically viable organization with social distancing.
Mm-hmm. Well, through the panel that we've just had here and through the different cooperation projects like LiveDMA or Liveurope, there's been also a lot of exchange and solidarity in the sector. Even, in the larger live music ecosystem, we've seen a lot more dialogue. Now that we've really talked about the data analysis and the really methods and tools to measure the value of live music spaces in the cities, it would be interesting to get your input on how and why would you need those kind of studies for your own organization.
And I thought it would be useful if I could bring a practical case I'm working on now to answer, of course, the huge problem we are all living with this global crisis. There's a lot of artists that depends on our circuit, but nobody's talking about that. And who's the fault? I think it's our fault. First, we have to, because we have to explain how important we are, and so quite recently we managed to gather. Now we are 22. Grassroots music venues from all over Portugal. And it's very interesting when we can see that some venues, they have annual audience, that it's the same of a big festival. But at the same time, they have, they program maybe 4 or 5 times more artists. They are promoting local artists. If we could like these 22 venues, most of them are small size, of course. We have almost 1 million annual audience. Right now, it's a lot of people. It's almost 6,000 acts. At least 15,000 artists were involved in this circuit. We also collect some data on communication and on the reach of social media, and like putting together Facebook and Instagram we get to an annual reach of 15 million people. And I think this would be crucial to help cultural policies. But at the same time, it's been helping the networking between venues. Of course, we are closer because of the crisis, but we are closer because we are sharing information, we are sharing data, we are sharing our problems. And I also believe it's going to be crucial to help our promotion, protection. Extremely important to make a point on what we do.